Hi, Shelby.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, fine.
Great. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to join me today for this chat. We usually start out by asking you to shamelessly talk about yourself just a little bit and talk about your educational and experiential journey to get where you have ended up now in this fantastic position with Ducks Unlimited.
Sure. Can you tell me a little bit about Bluebird Environmental? And
Sure,
yeah,
yeah. It's my company. I'm
yeah,
founder and director, and I provide environmental education for all ages. So I go into classrooms for grades K to 12 and teach on request of teachers. And then we also host external workshops that the public can then attend and join. And then yesterday for Canada Day, we did an event. Well, I did an event at Museum London,
oh,
which
great.
I led a nature walk.
Hmm.
So that was free for the participants to come and join us on that very, very hot Canada Day.
Yeah.
Um, so those are kind of the three pillars of the work that I do, aside from content creation and making any resources that I find online, like guides or publications or books that are openly accessible. I put them all on the website as well for everybody. So it's all in a central hub.
Great. Do you have a lot of staff?
Just me.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just
Wow.
me.
Well,
Yeah. So I started in January
that's a lot of
2020.
work. Yeah.
It is,
Yeah.
but I love it so much, and
Hmm.
especially when I get to have these chats with folks like you and get to make these little profiles for potential or current students to see what their career path could maybe look like someday.
Yeah. Well, yeah, hopefully I can help someone out.
It just takes one, and I'm sure even if it's just to confirm that they want to do something else, that's helpful in itself too. I find it's
Yeah.
kind of tricky to figure out what you want to do in the environmental field because there's so many subsectors. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you so
Hmm.
much.
You're welcome.
So yeah, so let's hear a little bit about your journey so other students can see what maybe they can model theirs after.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, I always knew that I wanted to work in the environmental sector. And like you said, I wasn't really exactly sure what. So, growing up, certainly I guess it was my dad that instilled an appreciation of the environment for me. He took me out hunting and fishing when I was younger. So I always enjoyed those activities, and just being out in nature, in general was a very comfortable place for me to be. So again, I wanted to do something with wildlife or the environment, but I really wasn't sure. So it was somewhat serendipitous, actually. After my first year university, I had a job in a meatpacking plant, which obviously I didn't wasn't going to be my career path. But the second after my second year, I got hired on with the Canadian Wildlife Service. I'd applied for a role as a summer student there. And despite its name, the Canadian Wildlife Service is really all about waterfowl. It's not about wildlife, and that's what I didn't know. And I wasn't necessarily interested in strictly waterfowl and wetlands, but that's how I got into it. So it was just my summer job. So that's the first bit of advice I'd give students, is just definitely try to find, summer positions or contracts that are related to your field of study or what you want to do down the road. So I worked 2 seasons with the Canadian Wildlife Service, and it was all about basically doing waterfowl surveys in southern Manitoba, southern Saskatchewan, central Saskatchewan, and the idea was to try to get a population estimate so that they could set the hunting regulations and the number of ducks that could be harvested in the fall. And that was the project that I was working on. Um, After 2 seasons of that, I applied to be a research assistant with Ducks Unlimited. Just because was looking for a change and something else, to do rather than just counting ducks. So I applied with Ducks Unlimited, and the projects were out in northwestern Alberta at the time. And I applied, I got the job because I was very good at duck identification by that time. And a big part of that job was actually surveying newly constructed Ducks Unlimited wetland projects to get an estimate of how many waterfowl were being produced annually on those wetlands. And then again, to justify the cost of building the wetlands. So um, I did 2 seasons of that. And what we found actually was that the biologists who were estimating the duck production were actually underestimating the duck production on those marshes. So it was pretty satisfying work to find out, our research showed that we were actually producing more waterfowl than what the biologists thought. So after the second summer of that, I actually graduated from the University of Manitoba with a Bachelor of Science in Zoology. So back then we didn't have the cool programs like they have at Sir Sanford Fleming that you could get into, where the environmental field was very broad and generic, right? You have a Bachelor of Science in Zoology or ecology or whatever it was. It was very general, right? So when I applied for the DU position, the permanent position, when I graduated, I got it, and it was to be the area biologist in the Grand Prairie office in Alberta, and that was a really cool position. I learned so much about wetlands and waterfowl. I was there for 7 years, and just a real cool part of Canada to work in, just because of the amount of wilderness in the area. Lots of forests still left, lots of wetlands. It's a very large agricultural area. It's very unique in that it's surrounded by forest, and then you've got this agricultural area. So for wildlife, you have a lot. You have, mule deer, white-tailed deer, elk, moose, plus, about 15 or 16 different kinds of waterfowl that you see, passing through the area. So really neat place. I feel pretty privileged, to have worked in that area. And then after 7 years, I decided to make a life change and change geographies because my family are in Manitoba, and my wife now, I met her there. Her family's in Quebec, so we compromised and moved to Ontario. And I ended up getting a job again at Ducks Unlimited out of the Barrie office. Again, based mostly on my past experience. So I've undertaken a number of different roles with the company since I moved here in '98. And yeah, the diversity of the job, I'd say, is has what's kept me here. I don't like doing the same thing every day. So, with this company, if you look for it, there's lots of different opportunities and different projects that come along to work on. And I've always enjoyed that diversity and opportunity to grow and learn every day.
Well, my goodness, that's quite the journey that you've had there. I think you're
Yeah.
one of the only people that started outside of Ontario, but has migrated their way here. Thankfully, we
Yeah.
appreciate your work, of course, and definitely having met you and now in this conversation. Um, what do you think was the driver, I suppose, for you to stay with Ducks Unlimited after your couple of co-op stints? Was it the diversity like what you had talked about, or you were very
Yeah.
interested in staying on that
It's
one project?
it's a mix of diversity of the job, the mix of field work and office work,
Mm.
and the people. The teams that I worked on, I really enjoyed working with the people here. So, yeah, those are the things that kept me on. So, as you can imagine, with COVID, it's a different dynamic now without having an office. So we work remotely. I should have said that since COVID. Um, so we don't have a physical office anymore. So it's not as easy to build that team dynamic or social dynamic that you have working as a team. However, what's a big pro of that is that we can now hire people that don't have to move to Barrie or Kingston. So the talent pool is a lot bigger, and those engaging great people, it's still good to have those folks, even though they don't come into Barrie very often. We have a great team here in Ontario, and I enjoy working with them and learning from them.
That's great. The people can definitely make or break where you're working, I find, more so than the
Mhm.
job a lot of the time. But having the combination of both being exactly what you're looking for is the ultimate goal, I would assume. With that, what would you say is your favorite project? Would it have been that first one that you started with for sentimentality, or is it one that came a little bit later?
That's Yeah, that's a great question because I've favorite projects, but for different reasons. And you're right. I mean, some of those first ones in Alberta, I mean, it was so cool to work there because land was cheap, compared to Southern Ontario. I mean, we were literally buying quarter sections of land. So that's 160 acres, half a mile by half a mile, squares of land for 30 or $40,000. And then we could do the restoration work for another 30 or 40,000. And, so under 100,000, we could do a very major restoration project. So quite
Wow.
affordable to work out there. It's probably not the same anymore, but, back in the 1990s, it was that affordable. Um, Here in Ontario, been involved with quite a few different projects, but another career change that I made while working with Ducks was 9 years ago. I actually switched into my current role, which is now managing our environmental consulting business line. So you may not know that Ducks Unlimited also has environmental consulting services, and I manage that program. It's fairly new, but we work with industry and developers to be a solutions provider, excuse me, for when they need habitat restoration works, usually triggered by some sort of development permit. So, like a renewable energy company could come to us and say, hey, we need 50 acres of grassland because our solar project or wind turbine project impacted some bobolink habitat. So now we need to restore that habitat. So those are satisfying projects for me because it it allowed us to engage with clients that we normally wouldn't through our typical conservation program where we're dealing mainly with private landowners and then we're subsidizing those types of wetland projects. Here with the industry sector, they're coming to us to be a solutions provider and they're paying us to do that. And then the revenue that we generate through that business line goes right back into conservation programs on the ground. So it helps us really, leverage our fundraising abilities through the consulting business. So I find that really satisfying too, because I was working in the conservation field for 25 years and I switched to this and it was kind of like a rebirth of my career. So doing something I never thought I was able to do. And that's another thing, another piece of advice that I'd give to students is don't underestimate yourself. You know, um, I'd say you can be your own worst enemy or your own best friend. If you put into your mind that you can do something, you can definitely do it, but you don't want to undersell yourself.
Yeah, I find that to be a common thing, especially with applying for jobs. When they say that they want tons of years of experience, I find a lot of the time, if you're the right person, that's not as big of a deal as your years of experience. It's mostly about whether you're going to fit well with the team and if you
Yeah.
have the interest to learn and grow within a place and set down your roots and really invest your time in your skills. That seems to be the major driver. So I think I would tack on to your advice on that, which is to also apply for things that you think you're not qualified
Yep.
for maybe one or two bullet points, because you might just be the right fit for the company and they will adjust for you. And then that ends up being a better situation for everybody in the long term.
Yeah, and
Uh,
actually that applied to me for this position because I had no experience in environmental consulting at all, and I probably wasn't the strongest candidate on paper. But I was the best fit from a cultural perspective for the company. I understood how Ducks Unlimited worked, and I could, liaise well with the clients. And I think the interviewer saw that, and that's why I was chosen. And sure, it was a bit of a learning curve, but that's not a bad thing, right? So, um, yeah, yeah, I can't believe I did it. I look back and go, wow, like there were certainly times when I just got hired thinking, what have I done? But then you just do it, right? And as long as you have the support, and I had a great manager at the time, she was very supportive and gave me a lot of good suggestions. And if you have a good mentor, that's always helpful too. Someone who's doing that job or has done that job in the past and can give you some hints and tips. That's another good thing.
well, yeah, and that's what I was gonna say when you had said you maybe weren't the best qualified on paper for the position, but
Hmm.
you're never hired as an individual in any job, let alone an environmental field. It's always a team of people. And usually they're looking for someone who will work with that team well and learn from that team, because those people have been in that position, or at least with the company, longer than you have, and they can teach you the things that they've learned. And
Yeah.
what I've learned really well in my own experience, but especially through these career chats, is pretty much everybody in the environmental field's really open to helping other people, even if it's just answering their questions or doing these little chats when they have time or things like that.
Hmm.
So definitely don't be afraid to ask. And I found even with rejection emails, if you did an interview and didn't get a position, I tended to ask why that
Yep.
was afterwards,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and really grow from that and be like, oh, okay, well, this was something that was a hard skill that they were looking for. I'll go and self teach myself how to do that, or learn that next semester if I was in school, or things like that. Or maybe, oh, that wasn't a good position for me because I would have done that so much, or things like that. It also gives a really good impression with those companies afterwards if you apply for jobs later, because it shows you're genuinely interested in working for them. So
Yeah.
lots of tack ons to your fantastic advice so far. um I would love to, I guess, ask a couple of questions. So, firstly, when you mentioned that you guys do environmental consulting, do you, for the majority of the time, is it clients coming to you directly to give you contracts, or are you guys also doing bids and tenders?
Mostly sole sourcing. We have applied for jobs, but have not been overly successful. We don't have a very large team, so we certainly can't devote, a whole team to submitting bids, like other large consulting firms can do. So, and because we're small, we don't have, we don't have a lot of summer students that we can hire out at a lower rate per hour. So we tend to get outbid there. Our specialty is offering those niche value-added services, especially around environmental types of projects. Obviously, there are wheelhouses wetlands, but we can establish and manage almost any type of aquatic or terrestrial habitat. So we try to work with companies that can either sole source us, or else we work with other consulting firms, like small to mid-sized consulting firms that may not have the wetland design and construction capacity in-house. So we feel that that's our best business model.
Yeah, yeah. I've worked for a couple of companies that were smaller, as well as spoken to a couple that were larger. And I find that to be often the case with smaller firms, is they tend to team up with other ones. Like
Hmm.
you guys have a really, really good ecologist, and we have a really good fluvial geomorphologist. Let's band together and apply for this job together, because
Yep.
that'll be
Yeah.
more competitive, and then we both get to share in it, instead of both not getting an opportunity to share in it because we're not as well rounded maybe in an area. So I
Yep.
think that's great, and it opens a lot of opportunity for collaboration and learning about other small organizations. Do you know who Ontario Streams is by chance?
Yes. Oh yeah. Hmm.
Okay, so they're
Yeah.
who I thought of when you were talking about situations like that with teaming up with others, or consulting with others. I thought of Ontario Streams because that's their whole model, is working with other people and relying on the kindness of volunteers. And they're a fabulous organization, just like you guys. So I just was wondering if you had done projects with them before.
Them, Trout Unlimited. Yeah. Like I said, a few of the smaller consulting firms we've worked with, either subcontracted them out
Mhm.
um, for some of their field staff. Because again, we don't carry a lot of field staff. We're just not at that point yet. Or, they sub us out for, again, specific wetland design types of projects.
How long have you guys had your consulting division?
Uh, I think since 2012 or 2013. So over 10 years, but we still find the biggest barrier is that folks don't know that we offer these services. So we attend, appropriate conferences and trade shows where we can both network with clients and other consulting firms that are there. And
Mhm.
then ideally, have a speaker spot. And that way you've got a captive audience, to talk about some of the projects and environmental services that we offer. So, for example, we sit on the Ontario Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association Rehabilitation Committee. So every year we try to highlight a project on the rehabilitation tour, and try to get a speaker spot at their AGM every year to talk about, gravel pit rehabilitation, utilizing wetlands. So yeah, we strategically attend the conferences where we think that there are business development opportunities.
Yeah, I think that that's really important. I think maybe more public facing things like this would also help too, because that's all I knew as well for you guys for the longest time was the research component. Uh,
Yeah.
kind of until I met you and I asked what you did, and I was like, oh, I didn't even know that you guys did that. And I've been in this field for a little bit of time now. So I think that this type of thing, doing these types of chats and appealing to the non-engineers
Hmm.
maybe is really really helpful. So I definitely appreciate you sharing what you guys do. So hopefully at least a couple other people see this and then they can tell their friends that you guys do that, and then the word can get around because you guys do a lot of really cool work and I would love to see people know more about it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, from the environmental consulting perspective, we're not your typical consulting firm. We can't
Yeah.
be. We are first and foremost a science-based wetland conservation company. And I
Mm,
think in some ways that gives us a leg up. But at the same time, we can't do a lot of the front end, EISs and,
yeah.
wetland assessments and stuff because it puts us in a conflict of interest. We certainly don't want to be saying, oh, yeah, that wetland's more important than that one. They're all important. So we come in at the back end as a service provider, and we have access to a lot of land. We have a large land inventory where they can host offset projects, either wetland or terrestrial. But again, we can't do that front end work. We don't have the capacity. And number two, it would be potentially, recommending, saving one wetland over another. And that's certainly not where we want to conserve all wetlands, and offsetting is definitely the last resort.
For sure, for sure. That's always option three.
Yeah.
In ideal, I by education, I am a fluvial specialist, so I'm a
Hmm.
river scientist. So I understand the gamble that comes in that situation, especially when you're talking about urban areas, because it's all offsetting in a way to make room for development if it's going to be approved in the first place. Uh,
Hmm.
so definitely in my dreams, we could just say no and save all of it and not move any of it, but that's unfortunately not the reality. But I appreciate your mindset,
Hmm.
at least your organization's mindset as well
Yeah.
about conservation. I can't even imagine how many acres you guys have under conservation at this
Over a million. We've hit over a million.
across Canada.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. We hit
Wow.
that milestone, at least 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. I think it
That's
was even just
incredible.
before COVID. Yeah.
Would the majority of it be in the prairies then? Like you were speaking earlier about how much easier it was, at least in the beginning, to get land out
Yeah.
there?
And land isn't carved up in the small pieces it is here in Ontario. So, yeah, a lot of our work is done on the prairies, but we do some big stuff here in Ontario too. Here in Ontario as well, we are, more valued for waterfowl staging habitats, or big coastal wetlands we have along the Great Lakes are extremely important for those spring and fall migrating ducks, while they're, you know, stopping and fueling up for their trip north or south. But we also have some good breeding areas in the south. But as you know, in the south, there's so much development pressure and land prices are so high. It's hard to compete with development.
It really is, especially when you have the people here already and they
Hmm.
need a place. It's not even planning for
Yeah,
the future anymore. It's planning for what we have now. So,
yeah.
yeah, those pressures are definitely felt in this province, and you can see it in areas, especially places like Oakville, for instance, that have encroached on like coyote habitat, for
Hmm.
example. There are entire subdivisions there that have their own app dedicated to live tracking them so that you don't run into them on your walk because they live in the subdivision with the
Hmm.
people there.
Yeah, well, as long as they can tolerate that, that's good. I mean, I think that, with education, I can certainly see um, our ability to develop while protecting the environment will be enhanced in the future as we understand more how we can coexist with the environment and need to, right? Development and the environment are not mutually exclusive. we'll need both.
For sure. I think one of my favorite examples of that is in Woodstock. Although I'm a little bit biased, Woodstock is near and dear to my heart. I've lived there for quite a few years. My family is there. But they have a huge wetland. I think maybe the largest urban wetland, at least in Ontario, is what I'm told.
No, I don't know. Did you talk to Phil Holst? Yeah.
I have. I've spoken to him. He's very passionate
He's
about what he
that,
does.
yes, he's passionate.
Well, that's great though. I love that. I love when people have such a niche passion like that because he
Yeah,
could talk my ear off. Well, he did.
he did, I'm sure.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, there's lots of waterfowl and turtle species there, and there's a road that goes right through that area around Sudsworth Park. And so for the longest time, only up until recently, there wasn't any fencing or
Hmm.
anything. And so communally, the people of Woodstock would just always stop and wait and let
For
them
the,
go because it was
oh
just a
yeah, yeah,
fact of life to
right.
coexist like that. So thankfully now we have some fencing up, so that's not as much of an issue anymore. But yeah, there are definitely solutions that people are coming up with all the time for us to live coexistingly, which I think is fantastic.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
with that said, I was wondering if you were able to share some either upcoming projects or projects that you guys are currently working on in the conservation area, or maybe consulting, if you're allowed to say those. I
Yeah,
know they're
so that's the
usually under lock
thing.
and key.
I I can't really share too much about what's upcoming just because of the client confidentiality thing.
I understand.
There are a few wetland offset projects that we're working on. Um, and those are great when they happen on private land, actually. It's a bit of a challenge sometimes because obviously the regulators want to make sure that, whatever habitat we create is there for a long time. And if it's
Yeah.
on private land, there's no guarantee the land won't get sold. So how do you protect that in perpetuity? So, or at least
Mhm.
30 years, which is pretty much perpetuity in Southern Ontario. So, we can be creative around our land leases and, after a certain number of years, for sure, the wetland is established. It gets mapped by the Conservation Authority, so it is theoretically protected moving forward. And, you have to keep in mind too that landowners aren't going to sign an easement. They don't want to lock up their land or potentially
Mhm.
lower the property value of their land. So we have to be flexible and understanding. So yeah, I mean, we try to have them constructed on public land, excuse me, but that doesn't always work that way. So there are a few of those. We're working on building up our fish offsetting projects. We've constructed a couple really large ones for the Ministry of Transportation near Napanee as a result of the ferry dock expansions in Amherst Island and Wolf Island. Those were some of my first ones that I built under this role that I'm in now. I'm quite proud of those because they brought in our engineers, our biologists, Marcom's folks. So it was a real good example of collaboration between our business lines internally, to band together and get these projects done because I didn't have a staff at the time. We're still only a team of three, but for the first 7 years, I was like you, I was by myself. So any resources I needed, I had to beg, borrow, and steal from the conservation team. So while we were getting this project or program off the ground. So yeah, there's lots of stuff going on, as you can imagine, with all of the development proposed in Ontario. I got to think that there'll be unfortunately some offsetting triggered, but we'll be there, to answer the bell if we're called upon. And like I said, I think we have lots of good opportunities where landowners want to host more habitat, and we can be the matchmaker between, the project proponent and the landowners who want to host these habitat projects.
I love that way that you just said that, no matchmaking between them. I think that that's great because it does take the right people to do the right projects. I find like anybody can do any project, but if the right people are doing it, it's done in such a way that it's a legacy project and people talk about it for a really long time. And I think we need a lot more of that now, especially since it is such a bargaining type of situation now to protect anything in Southern
Yeah,
Ontario.
and you know, we work a lot with landowners, as you know, most of our projects are on private land, the conservation projects. So, you have that level of trust that you build with
Yeah,
landowners, and landowners are only going to sign an agreement if they trust you.
yeah.
So, you know, I think we're well positioned to be a solutions provider for the development side, going forward, and trying to strike that balance between development and protecting the environment.
For sure, for sure. Because everybody knows who you are, but being able to then go and say, yeah, but we also can bridge that gap for you between consulting
Yep.
with our research expertise, plus you already know us and we have a good relationship. I think you guys are really
Hmm.
positioned well for that type of thing. And I think people should know more
Hmm.
about that, and I would love for more people to know about it. I think um getting into programs, circling back to something you said before about mentorship, I think
Hmm.
that that's really a big key in this field. It's about who you know. If you find the
Yep.
right person whose career you kind of want to model yours after, and they're willing to mentor you, I think that that's so nourishing. In addition to obviously job experience like co-ops and
Hmm.
volunteering and things like that, the Society for Ecological Restoration actually has a mentorship program now. It
Hmm.
started a couple of years ago, and they match make you. So they
Oh
ask
yeah.
you what field you're either a current student in or you're looking to be a student in.
Yeah.
I think it was only open to post-secondary students in the beginning, but that might have changed now. And then they match make you based on who has decided to put themselves up as a mentor, and it lasts for I think 6 months, 4 or 6 months. And you set your own meetings and everything, and it's a fantastic program. So
No, I'll
that
have to check it out. I'm actually a mentor right now for a young lad in Saskatchewan. He just graduated out there. So there were a few students available for mentoring. So I put my name in the hat and they matched me with this young guy. So we've only had one meeting so far, but yeah, I like it.
Yeah, definitely look into it. If you're, I
Because
think
I
it's
wish I would have had that advice when I was his age, because you're trying to figure out who you are and what you're doing. And yeah, it would have been nice.
exactly, exactly, and there's nothing better than somebody who's already done it
Yeah.
to give you that type of advice. And that's kind of the whole point of what I do is to bridge that gap for people and be like, well, here's a resource that you may not have known was there, or here's an option for a career path that you probably never heard of, but would be super cool if you're interested in it. Um, like anything marine biology, I find super fascinating,
Oh yeah.
specifically
Yeah.
because that's a whole different realm
Yeah.
of knowledge. So,
For sure.
uh, so yeah, I definitely appreciate your time today talking about your journey in itself and the type of work that you guys do. And hopefully this will help you guys get more clients, maybe, but at least more
Well,
recognition and interest
I
for what you guys do.
thanks for offering to promote our services. I
Of
really appreciate
course.
it. Yeah.
I think the work that you do is great, and I appreciate your time today. Was there anything else that you wanted to add before we say goodbye?
No, well, I think you've already mentioned it, but if I look back at some of the mistakes I made, and one of the big ones was just not asking enough questions.
Yeah.
Especially early on in my career, I took things for granted and I didn't want to be seen as weak, by asking a dumb question. And I think back now, and that was a big mistake. So that's the only other advice I have.
There's no such thing as a dumb question.
Yeah.
I have learned I ask too
Yeah.
many questions, I think, but at least I then know what we're doing.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's a great piece of advice is to ask. The worst that can happen is somebody says no.
Hmm.
Will you be my mentor? No, I don't have time. Okay, well, do you know somebody who would?
Hmm.
And most of the time, I have found people are willing to connect you with the right person for you or somebody else that would have been able to
Yeah.
help you in the way that they had the capacity to. So, yeah, definitely asking questions. Keep
Hmm.
that curiosity alive. That's great advice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
With that, I think that's all for today. If you ever think of anything,
Okay.
let me know and I'll definitely share it with people. But I appreciate your time so much today. Thank you for the work that you do, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Well, thanks you too. And yeah, if I can be of help further down the road, just let me know. And good luck
Awesome.
with your company.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, maybe we will be in chats then
You
later on. Awesome. Well, thank you so much and take care.
too. Bye for now.